like food hubs and how to better support those. But these dynamics of making missing links and overall inequities are just the most apparent when discussing hunger. Here's a chilling statistic that we'll cue off with. In 2020, over 17 million American children did not have consistent access to enough food. So, Dr. Shrivandra Jacobs-Young, thank you for joining us. I want to kick it off with you. Your work as the chief scientist of the USDA puts you at the heart of the administration's efforts around funding to address food supply chain challenges and hunger in the United States. Let's start off with what you've learned as the country's been in the throes of a hunger crisis. What are the takeaways you can share with us? And what can you tell us about where momentum is within the USDA right now?
Thank you so much for having me today. And we've been very fortunate to hear from Secretary Vilsack a little bit earlier in the program. And I'm sure he shared this, and I think it bears repeating. Today, we're containing the pandemic. We're ensuring racial justice and equity, responding to a mounting hunger and nutrition insecurity crisis, rebuilding the rural economy, and addressing the impacts of climate change. Those are our top priorities. The COVID-19 pandemic caused deep economic hardship, resulting in millions of Americans struggling with food insecurity and unemployment. This includes, as you shared, as many as 30 million adults and millions of children. More than 1 in 5 Black and Latino households report that their households did not have enough food to eat. Roughly 43 million Americans are enrolled in the SNAP program today. As acting chief scientist, working alongside some of the world's best agriculture researchers, it's our role to provide the data and information to support decision-making and inform programs. Federal nutrition programs are science-based, oriented toward promoting nutrition security and access to healthy food choices, and easily accessible to those who qualify. There is momentum. USDA has worked to extend emergency nutrition assistance to all SNAP participants. We are working to update the Thrifty Food Plan to ensure that food assistance benefits reflect the true cost of a basic healthy diet. We're also strengthening the PEBT program by making it easier for states to establish school programs to help support struggling families and by increasing the current daily benefit. Our goal is to strengthen WIC, to introduce more eligible families to its benefits and services that keep the program so that they can benefit longer. This will improve health for infants, more nutritious diets and better health care for children, and higher academic achievement for students. We believe that by connecting more eligible women and young children to WIC is one of the tools to reduce stark disparities in our country. USDA is looking for ways to remove barriers to access and make it easier for anyone who qualifies for federal food assistance, SNAP, WIC, school lunch programs, PEBT, to access those programs. Food banks are our very important partners, and I'm happy to be on the panel with many of our participants at the front line of this fight against hunger. USDA will do much more to support our nonprofit food bank network and ensure children have access to healthier, more nutritious food at school each day. The prevalence of food insufficiency among the U.S. adults rose from 9.5% as of April 2020 to 13.4% as of December 2020. The good news is we're seeing improvements. We've now declined to 8% as of April 2021. And so we have certainly not reached pre-pandemic levels, but we are working hard. The basic and my fundamental comment that I want to leave at the end of my comments is that we all have a role in promoting food security and nutrition. Federal agencies, state partners, nonprofit advocacy organizations, policymakers, and others, we all must work together to meet this challenge. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Karen Washington, thank you for being here as well. And I'd love to turn it over to you because on the most local level possible, you and your organization, Rise and Root Farm in the Bronx, have been doing pioneering work on the ground for decades. And I'd love to just hear from you around, tell us, what has your organization learned and what has been most successful in creating accessible food for those who need it most? Again, you've been doing this for so long. I know there's
Yeah, so thank you for having me. So Rise and Root Farm is really located up in Chester, New York. We come from New York City. We're 4 women. 3 of us are LGBTQ women. 2 of us are women of color. And so we've really been working on food justice. First of all, making sure that people understand that food is a human right. For me, I've been doing this work for over 37 years. I'm an agitator and activist. And the question that my farm and we all ask is why in the greatest country in the world where we grow enough food and we waste enough food, that food is not getting down to the people that need it the most. And also we're looking at the broad spectrum of the food system to look at who is growing the food. When we talk about essential workers were the people who are the restaurant workers, the food workers, the farmers. And our mission is really to make sure that the next wave of farmers and farming activists are women and people of color. Right now, if you look at the statistics of farming here, especially in New York State, out of 57,000 farmers in New York State, only 139 are Black. And so we need to really speak about what does it take to increase the diversity and inclusion of farmers of color throughout the whole gamut and also throughout the country. Also, we need to talk about the involvement of community. For so long, there have been ways and outsiders really use terms as food deserts, food swamps, food mirage, and we're not that. You know, I look at people of color in both urban and rural communities that are poor, of being strong, resilient, trying to come together to talk about a food system that is cohesive, but also taking back the power. I think for so long, what we miss when we talk about moving forward past the pandemic is social capital and communal wealth, a conversation that we don't have. We are inundated by a charity-based food system that is not sustainable. So then how do we get the community to start talking about base building, start talking about wealth building, and start talking about getting the power back into the hands of the community? If we're going to move forward, we have to look at ways that empower people to look at economic development, job creation, entrepreneurship, owning stuff so that they don't have to be on food lines and bread lines. And so as an activist, as part of Rising Root Farm, this is what we are out to make sure that when we talk about food justice is really dismantling the social injustices that we see when it comes to the food system. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. So, as you were saying, hunger is an issue that's deeply intertwined with so many institutions of inequity and worker dignity, racism, and so much more. So I want to take it to Kiana Mickey, who works across regional food systems to make them more resilient. Kiana, thank you so much for being here. What can you share with us about your work? And can you help us think through how you yourself define food sovereignty and accessibility?
Sure. I think, there's a lot of concepts and terms that I think are new for folks, and folks really want to lean into it. And I think some of the terms that are really important to unpack is when we say food sovereignty, what does that look like? And for me, I really lean to peasant farmers and global leaders from across the country and the globe to people from the ground and what they say. And Via Campesina defines food sovereignty as ending hunger. That's explicit. The belief and praxis of not using food as a weapon. Like Karen said, that food is a basic human right, and the protection of natural resources. Land policy, land laws, the power needs to be with the people and the people most impacted. So we're talking about aggregating reform, policy reform, getting land that was stolen and resources extracted from communities, in particular communities of color, back to those folks. And the reality is, food, when we look at food security models, especially in our country in particular, they're not designed to end persistent hunger. They're not designed to shift the power back to the people who are most vulnerable, the most marginalized, and oftentimes have the solutions. They don't have the resources. They've been segregated from resources, from land, from capital, from building wealth in order to dismantle the inequities that we're facing. So when we're talking about food sovereignty, I think it's also important to understand and unpack what food security has done. It can help address some immediate responses or immediate needs around food. But it's really become a system of dumping food waste or surplus that is at the food at the end of the life cycle from different food systems into vulnerable communities. And oftentimes they don't have a say or a choice in those models. And even when they do, if we're looking at mutual aid efforts that especially in particular popped up in COVID, what you see is it's not viable. And if you're relying on charity, if you're relying on donations, these are not systems that are going to be viable for farmers, for community leaders, and certainly aren't going to build the wealth and health of those communities. So in my work, I recently became a consultant, or recently in the last year, and I work with farmers, community leaders, business, and other government stakeholders to figure out how to develop and identify models that mitigate risk management for the most vulnerable. And I'm talking about small to mid-scale farmers, communities of color, mixed markets, intermediate markets, and how to get healthy food to those people who need it the most. Are we building viability on the farm side? Are we keeping dignity throughout the supply chain? And is food now, instead of it being a driver of inequity, is it actually a connector? And so to me, it really speaks to racial, economic, and environmental equity. And we need to operationalize that from boards to staff to businesses and operations. And so when we say we want to see BIPOC farmers, when we say we want to see community-based hubs, we need people with the technical assistance and the community-based brilliance to connect together and do that. And I like to think that that's my work here.
Sorry, everybody. There's an emergency happening.
Thanks. Okay.
Yes, that was amazing. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Thank you. We're going to get all of that back in a very soon. But right now, I want to briefly teed up the antithesis to what Phil's going to talk about very well. So I want to bring it to Phil. Phil, you run an amazing livestock operation at Carversville Farm, which is kind of like the most idealized version of what's possible out there. But as Kiana was just talking about, it is a privately funded nonprofit. It's not really a replicable model because it's contingent on donors. But I know there's a lot of stuff that we can learn from your operation. So can you tell us a little bit about them and what we can take away from your work?
Sure. Well, thank you for inviting me, Chloe, and it's an honor to be on this panel with you, Karen, Kiana, and Dr. Jacobs-Young. So I think, as I've been farming, I've learned that farms are just a great laboratory to try new ideas. As many of us have found out, labor is most farms' biggest expense. And I think that the more innovative equipment that we can design, like invisible fencing, for example, for cattle, the less expensive it becomes to produce. So when food cost becomes less, then we're able to sell it for less money and more people are able to access it. And for a lot of small growers, the technology is being developed in the field. For example, we were able to design gravity feeders for our poultry that allow us to save time bringing food out to them on pasture. We set up invisible electric fence for our guard dogs that runs on a rechargeable power source. Also, things like that are happening in conventional space using automation and feeding, ventilation, heating, and plumbing. All of that infrastructure saves a lot in labor over time. So overall, I think I could see it being valuable for nonprofits that are trying to impact food security to develop other mapping software and be able to identify areas that are in the highest need. And I'm sure those types of things probably exist.
Yeah, and I honestly think there were, again, it's going to soup kitchen. Almost all of the meat is going and produce is going to soup kitchens in Philadelphia. The model is entirely based around that, and I think Phil, you've always told me that you guys invest so much time and effort into the food because it is really the best quality food possible. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, sure. So our aim really is to provide the most nutritious, top quality food possible to communities that don't have access or simply just can't afford to eat healthy food. And we accomplish this by tailoring our production to the soup kitchens, food pantries, and free farmers markets that we donate food to. We plan our growing season in accordance to what our partners want to cook with and provide for the communities they serve in Philadelphia. So our belief is that everyone deserves to be able to eat healthy food, and we focus our efforts on those most in need. People want to eat well. It's about more than educating people facing poverty to eat healthy food. Healthy food is simply just expensive and possibly not even available in disadvantaged areas. So our mission is to give them that choice and to serve our partners with dignity. So the farm is around 100 acres of productive land between our pastures, vegetable fields, and perennial crops. Last year, we were able to donate over 100,000 pounds of organic vegetables, 20,000 pounds of organic beef and poultry, 23,000 dozen organic pasture-raised eggs, and 11,000 organic plant starts to urban gardens. Actually, about an hour before this panel, my team and I actually finished processing around 500 chickens in our organically certified on-farm slaughterhouse. And all of these chickens will be frozen and donated to our kitchens in the coming weeks.
Great. Thank you so much. So, okay, so there is a nutrition crisis in addition to a hunger crisis, as we've all been talking about. I want to open up this next question to the panel. Maybe Dr. Jacobs-Young, we can go back to you, since this is a big one for Secretary Vilsack, who speaks a lot about nutrition security, and he spoke about that earlier today at this conference. Where is the USDA working on actually implementing that nutrition security, and what can you shed light on for us in terms of how nutrition and accessibility really intertwine?
So I shared earlier in my opening comments about many of the programs that have been implemented. We have a number of nutrition provisions that were passed in the American Recovery Plan, and we're very excited about the opportunity to do more. My role as chief scientist in leading the scientific research organizations inside of USDA, I just want to give you a couple of examples just where research and science plays a role. We have 6 nutrition centers in the Agricultural Research Service, located across the country. I'm studying nutrition science from gestation, because we recognize that when a woman is pregnant, that is a very important time. From 0 to 100 days is a critically important time. And so how do we know what to eat, how to eat it, how much, why we should have it? That's because of nutritional science. That's because of research. And so we're doing that in our laboratories. I'll just give you, an example. We're looking to build tools. We want to put tools in your hands, everyone on this panel and everybody, out there listening to us, to be educated. So our consumers can be educated, engaged, and proactive about their nutrition. We've heard Secretary Vilsack talk about the importance of having a healthy, high-quality diet so that we can have high-quality lives. And it's important that we provide that access to everyone. The Economic Research Service is a part of my mission area, and they explored, and thank you, Phil, because I think this is important, why high-income households tend to eat more healthfully than low-income ones in the United States. The researchers concluded that 90% of nutritional inequality is driven by differences in demand for healthy groceries between high-income and low-income households. The potential consequences of this research are profound, from urban planning to food distribution networks to healthcare delivery. I think it also ties into, once again, remember the research feeding the application, the incentives. In May 2021, USDA provided $490 million to its Special Supplemental Nutrition Program, the WIC program we talked about earlier, with a view to boosting the cash value voucher benefits so that program participants can buy more fruits and vegetables. The idea is to promote nutrition security alongside nutrition food security, because we want food security and nutrition security to ensure that all of us have access to healthy food. And so I think that there are a number of studies that we have underway. One of the things that we're studying is behavioral economics. We can provide the data, we can provide the guidance, and how do we get more people to adopt the right way to eat, or the healthiest diets. And so there are a lot of scientific questions that are still underway. I'll stop there.
I'd like to jump in. Can I just jump into that question? Thank you, Dr. Jacobs, for saying that, because I think what you brought up was really important is the educational piece. And so I know, along with Kiana, a lot of us have been working in communities of color to educate, especially people of color, their relationship to food and land and health. And for so long, as a farmer, of color, we tend to go away from the land, fear of the land. And so what we're trying to do is educate young people where food comes from, and then also their relationship of their ancestors and their grandparents to land. That, you know, they were farmers, and there's pride in being a farmer, and getting young kids their hands in the dirt, seeing being able to grow food, seeing that they're able to grow food, to eat the food is nutritious. And I think that's a important factor when we talk about education. Also, on Phil's point, our farm is a for-profit farm, and we need to talk about the cost and value of food when it comes to farms. It's all right to donate, but there's a cost and value, especially when you bring your produce into market, and having that educational piece within communities of color, low-income communities, both urban and rural, that there's a cost in that. And so that, you know, when we have people saying, well, how come I have to pay $2 for a bunch of carrots? I'm saying, well, you know, I'm looking at your Jordan sneakers and your Samsung Galaxy phones and trying to get them to understand the value of food. And when I started having that conversation around people who for so long have been used to getting food free, they understand it. And it's a hard conversation, but it's a necessary conversation we need to have as we look past COVID. Again, looking at technology, looking at communal wealth and social capital, being innovative, getting people off of a subsidized food system and challenging them to think outside the box in terms of ownership of land, ownership of businesses. Those are the things, financial literacy, those are the things that we need to be talking about, that we are talking about within our community, to buy local, to make sure that your dollars stay in the local economy, to generate businesses, because generate business within your community builds wealth.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd love to jump in. You know, something that I think, you know, Karen, you know, in our time at Just Food that you saw the beginnings of and that we continued on, was how important it was to be not just a food justice organization, but a driver of economic wealth and power, and shifting that power to our most marginalized folks, whether they were farmers, community leaders building food businesses, or running community-driven models, but understanding how important economic viability is to cultural relevancy in food, and how important it is for us, the folks that are not just seen as end consumers, but actually drivers of the work throughout the chain, and where are the resources and capital to support that. And, you know, I'm really glad to say, like, in the years since then, what we continue to see is this need and importance to truly foster a food-based solidarity economy, where food is at the core, but we connect to other different partners, our social, our political, our natural environments, our neighborhoods, as well as our farms. So it is, like she said, getting folks back to the land, but how are they able to do that? What are the resources, and minimizing the barriers, whether policy, money, funding, or otherwise? Are we continuing to find ways to build models, support models that can do that? So it makes me think of community land trust. And if we're thinking about not just rural production, we should be thinking about urban production too. And I know in New York, it's become of great interest, I'm sure in other urban centers as well. But I really continue to work with partners from the ground, community leaders and growers, to not just make sure that they have access to the land that they have, so the tenure, but also building and supporting land stewardship models where they're able to scale up what's feasible for their neighborhood, feasible for their businesses. And I think it does connect to the cultural relevancy of food. So I think oftentimes when we talk about food insecurity, we only think about big scale. And I think we forget about our small to mid-scale farmers and our producers. And we know that we need all. And we know that capital makes a difference. We know investing in proven models and innovation will get us there. What we don't always see is those resources getting to the most impacted. I wish every farmer was like as popular and as resources Karen and all the great work that she's done at Rise and Root in all these years. And I'd love to see more resources and get to farmers like Karen so they grow to go longer. Business models around value added, and it does connect to cultural relevancy in our nutrition. I think connecting to what Dr. Jacobs-Young was referencing, our nutrition science tell us whole food is important. Schools, if we're trying to feed our communities and our children, schools are a great point for that. And I think we shouldn't stop there. We should, again, it should not be just places for commodity food to fill the bellies of our children. These should be seen as job creators. We should see these as value add processing, getting resources, government resources, philanthropy resources together, nonprofits, leveraging economic power of our families. I think expanding PBT and other incentives like SNAP makes such great sense, but also the economic power of farmers to connect to contracts in order to get their food and cultural relevant food in particular into those menus and into the schools.
So much to highlight there, and thank you all so much. I know we could all talk for like an hour more about all of this. I very briefly want to just take us back to the poll, which we talked about earlier, and we asked the audience earlier. So we asked the audience, do you believe in the right to food? And I am actually very pleased to see that the audience does believe in the right to food. 69% of you agreed yes, 22 said no, 9% need more information. And we didn't really give you too much information when we asked that, but it's really been an idea that's been gaining steam globally. The United Nations is promoting the idea of universal access to food in its upcoming food summit. And the idea is taking hold in America, from West Virginia to Maine. I know Karen talked about it earlier today. There's a lot that's happening. And Kiana, you were also just mentioning, different programs. Another kind of new program that's coming out that's similar to this is a new bill that was unveiled to potentially make school lunch free for all. So, I'd love to hear from the panelists today. Does the right to food excite you? And in general, what else brings you optimism when looking ahead for our food system today?
Go ahead.
Phil, you know what? We've not allowed you to talk much. You go ahead.
Thank you. Well, yeah, one of our core values of the farm is that we believe, in dignity, and everyone has a right to food. And thanks to one of our partnerships with one of the soup kitchens we support in Germantown, Philadelphia, their chef Altenor stated that they went from using 60 to 80% canned food to 100% fresh food because of the consistent weekly deliveries. And so, it's really important to him too that the diners and people that they support are served with dignity and served like king and queens, as he would say. So, absolutely.
And I was just going to add that, the global population is expected to grow to 9 billion by 2050. So this issue is not going to get easier. It's going to be more challenging because all of those people are going to need to eat. And so we're going to have the challenge of producing enough food to feed the population and protect our natural resources. And so that's where, as scientists, where we're hard at work trying to figure out just how to do that. And so I believe in the right to food. I certainly do. And I think that when we think about food insecurity, we think about overseas as someone else's problem. Well, we're challenged right here at home. And it's just so heartening to see all the people on this panel and the many partners that are out there working to take this challenge on and make sure that not one of our children goes to bed hungry at night. And so I'm just grateful to be here and be a part of this conversation.
Thank you so much. Kiana and Karen, we'd love to hear last thoughts from you to bring us home.
Yeah, definitely. I think, first of all, food and fresh water are both human rights. I'm happy to see so many young people across this country and globally are now understanding what food justice and food sovereignty looks like. And it looks like them being in participating in the movement and being heard and being supported. So as a 67-year-old farmer, I am glad to see there's a new generation that is picking up the torch and a demanding change in the food system.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I agree with everybody. Food is a right. Water is a basic human right as well. What I continue to be inspired of and by, and what I would love to amplify and share with folks is, food missions and models that speak to food infrastructure, food production, as well as water infrastructure. And I would be remiss without mentioning a clear example of that is Talani Link Enterprises on the Navajo Nation. The great work of that community that they've done to leverage government funds and then some government funds, DNA planning practices, honoring their ancestors, their work, working collaboratively to build water infrastructure, food infrastructure for now and for the years to come. Check them out.
Amazing place to end. Thank you all so much. Seriously, all-star panel. I'm so honored to be on it with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
More
you.
to come from everyone here.